First, I wanted to just say, as the only man up here, I want to say how important it is to me to recognize the power of women telling women's stories. So thank you. This is a question for both director and screenwriter, so Maria and Rebecca. I was rereading, she said, before I came down here, there's so much material in there that you could make a movie from. You could do 20 different iterations of this story. What was the essential story that you wanted to tell? If you were debating whether or not a scene was in or out, what was the test? And what did you want to include, and what did you think was not worth including? Go ahead.
Well, I think we all wanted it to be incredibly female. And there was a lot of amazing material in the book. It's a brilliant book and an absolute page-turner. But it would be 9 hours in the telling. So my steer was to not only be female, but also to follow the journalist's point of view. So with that in mind, a lot of the material just out, and they were quite clean cuts, quite a lot about the Miramax office, and then just what was filmic. So with those in mind, that was the first initial kind of steer.
And Maria, you make a couple of key decisions early. One is you're not going to show anything that happened to these women, and also you're not going to show Harvey Weinstein's face. Could you talk a little bit about both decisions and what informed those choices?
As you maybe know, I at least for me, came comparatively late into this process. Usually I write or co-write, and I never experienced to read a script and being so blown away by it. And these choices to tell the story out of the perspective of the journalists, which entails that we have contact to Harvey Weinstein, hear his voice, or see this unexpected visit in the New York Times, was what they experienced. So this catalog of question in that particular field, with when you deal with such an intimacy, right? With sexuality, with violence. I encountered this catalog of questions with the Project Unorthodox already, and I think it was clear with these collaborators even before we met that there is no depiction of assault. And I do think there is nothing new to add to the world with another depiction of violence. But there is something new maybe to hear the stories out of the perspective of the people who lived through it and really see their faces, also hear their reflection on it and give it a specific room and space in this movie.
And Unorthodox is also a story about a woman claiming her power. Carey, I want to ask you a couple things. First, a scene that isn't in the book, but I think it's really important in the movie, and that's what we'll call the bar scene, where somebody doesn't understand what the word no means. And to me, it's a really important scene in the movie, but it's not in the book. Could you talk a little bit about that scene and what that says about Megan and work and men trying to interfere with the task at hand that you had as that character?
Yeah, it's not in the book. In the conversations that I had with Megan, that moment had not happened in her life, but she had had moments of extreme frustration and anger. And it was telling when we spoke to Jodie and Megan about, what would you be if you could be anything else? If you weren't a journalist, what would you be? And Jodie said, I would be a therapist, and Megan would be a police interrogator. And so she clearly had something in her that was very forthright. And I think you look at the sort of series of things that, everything that led up to that moment. I think that's all it is. He's actually really mild, but by comparison, it's really not. And he played it so well, because, I think it'd be very easy to play that as a sort of leery, awful man. He played it so brilliantly. He's kind of annoying, but he's not the worst. It's bearable, but it's everything that brought her to that moment. It's Trump and everything that she put into that investigation that ultimately didn't really produce results. And it's her postnatal depression, it's the frustration of this story. Are we ever going to get there? We have all this information. And then one guy comes in at the wrong moment and gets it.
Dede, this sounds like a flip question, but it's not. And that is, who was going to play Ashley Judd in this film? You settled on a good choice, but without Ashley Judd, there is no story, probably, because her going on the record, if people have read the book and seen the movie, it really hinges on what Ashley decides to do. Could you talk about the conversations about casting her? Was she reluctant? Did you talk to her just as Megan and Jodie talked to her about what this project would need, how it would benefit from her, even if there might have been risks?
Sure. I think we had this hope that as many people could participate if they wanted to. So the dream was that Ashley would play herself. The dream was that Lauren O'Connor would really read her memo, that we would use Ambra's full tape, that we would, that was Gwyneth's voice, that's Judith Godresh's voice. But it was only ever, it was just very carefully presented and asked. And if someone didn't want to do it, we understood. And then fortuitously, Ashley was in Berlin. And so while Maria couldn't be in New York because of visa and COVID and 700, I don't know, the challenges, she did get to sit with Ashley, and they had an amazing couple hours together. And at the end of it, Ashley said, okay.
Wow. And what about the audio from Ambra? Because I think we hear almost all of it.
All of it.
Was that something that was part of the deal, or you just felt you wanted to play all of it?
Oh, I think it was one of our rules. Like, you're not allowed to trim this, because this woman was extraordinarily brave, way ahead of everyone else, and she went and wore this wire, and she stood there and endured that conversation, and then the police declined to press charges. So it felt essential to us, which is not a traditional thing to do, to drop like a 2.5-minute audio piece in the middle of a movie, but it wouldn't have been right to edit it.
And it's almost as terrifying as what we don't see. Just hearing it is almost scarier. Maria, I want to ask you about, you're working inside a real newsroom. You're working, I suspect Jodie and Megan might have been around. I suspect Dean might have been around as well. How do you separate, what they might bring to you in terms of advice for verisimilitude, and make sure that you're making the movie that you want to make, that even if there's a change here or a change there, that they're happy with it, but you still get to execute the story that you want to make?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you're just happy about contribution. Mm-hmm. You deal with a true story and not just any true story. And there's, of course, also this moment, I think, within all of us of intimidation and a huge amount of respect and responsibility for it. And so the fact that Jodie and Megan were so tireless and answering all our questions was beautiful, because you can only react to that with an extra round of work and read a lot and talk a lot and get all the information you need to at one point then say, okay, all this knowledge, all this dialogues, all this information is in me and I carry it. We all carry it, right? And then at one point you have to decide, not decide, but you have to realize this is not a documentary. This is a feature film. This is a fictionalization. Just the fact that Carey portrays Megan as an artistic choice, and in the hands of someone else it would have been completely different. So you have to jump, and latest when you start shooting, and follow your instincts. And I have to say, Jodie and Megan were not around during shooting, but they were accessible for us whenever we wanted. And I think it was quite an exercise for them too, to entrust us with so much of their private sides of their lives too. And yeah, we were entrusted.
Carey, I'm going to ask this last question of you. You can't really forecast or predict how people react to a film. But if the film has worked the way you hoped, what are the kinds of conversations you might want to overhear with people going out of the theater? What would make it feel like they got what this film was about?
I think when I read the article originally, I thought, gosh, that's crazy. What a big moment. I wonder what will happen. I had no idea. And I didn't think much beyond that. And then everything sort of changed within our workplace a bit. And, you know, conversations around me changed a bit. And I never thought about the people who'd written it. And then when I read She Said and I read the script, I thought, wow, it was these two women. And gosh, the people that spoke to them, what did they put on the line for this? And what moment have we ever taken, really, as a society to say thank you to any of them, really? Because the noise was all about the men, and the noise was all about, well, this guy and this bad guy and this bad guy. And it's so much more about what these women gave us. And it feels like I do feel immense gratitude releasing the film every time we're in a room with any of the survivors, any time we're with Megan and Jodie. You know, they put so much on the line. The courage that it took to do that, I think, is worthy of a film. It's worthy of a document, and it's worthy of conversations that, you know, your children will have. I mean, I think it seems like it's an important thing for us to have, to be able to say this is categorically what happened and how they did it, and we owe them something forever because it has changed the landscape.
And She Said, this is what happened. I want to thank all of you, Maria, Carey, Rebecca, Dede. Thank you so much for making this movie. Tell your friends to go see it in a theater, because if people don't show up, we're not going to see She Said 2, or whatever that would be. Thank you all very much.